Hello and welcome to Renewable Energy and Wind Energy Production Tax Credit Help. Today's topic will be how to add multiple owners of different types within the application. Just a quick side note on ownership percentages. Ownership percentages within this application are critical. Each applicant must provide details for all of the owners. Each of these totals must equal 100%. However, if you have additional owners over and above that own entities A, B, and C that have an ownership percentage in Wind Project 1, they must also be broken out. And those percentages must equal 100% for each of the entities that have invested in the applying facility or business. Okay, that being said, let's go ahead and move back to our sample project. Our project today is Wind Project 1 LLC. It's a limited liability company. We've already entered our information in the previous panels that we discussed, and we're now ready to allocate ownership and ownership percentages. So, in order to do this, it's really very simple. The first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and click on the plus button. This will allow us to add an owner. We're going to add an owner here, our first owner. We're going to have multiple owners in our example, just so that you get the idea. It won't be anything too terribly involved. So our first owner is going to be an individual. That individual's name is Abraham Lincoln. It's under him there. He does not have a business name because he is an individual, and we've already established that he is investing directly in Wind Project 1. Because Abe is an individual, he has a social security number and not a federal tax ID number. Abe has a mailing address. In this city. Gettysburg, of course, is in the state of Pennsylvania. You're going to give Abe a zip code. Abe has a telephone number in case we need to contact him with any questions. Abe has an email address. Project 1. We're going to say Abe owns 50% of Wind Project 1. We can go ahead and hit save. And here we can see, for purposes of breaking out our ownership, that we have Wind Project 1 LLC, which is our applying facility or business. There is 100% ownership that needs to be allocated. You can see that we have allocated 50% of the ownership to an individual, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln owns 50% of Wind Project 1. That means there is 50% of Wind Project 1 that is owned by another entity. So, who exactly is this entity? What exactly is this entity? How are we going to go ahead and do that? It's very simple to break that out. We'll go back to our primary entity, which is the applying project or business or facility. Click on the plus. And here we go ahead and we can select whatever type of entity owns the remaining 50% or whatever percent. For purposes of our example, we're going to break this down into a 50-50 split between Abraham Lincoln and a limited liability company that we're going to call Environmental Investors LLC. Now, because it's a company, You can see that the first name, middle name, and last name are grayed out. If it were a sole proprietorship or an individual, that would not be grayed out, but we do have a company, therefore that is not germane, it is grayed out. Because Environmental Investors LLC is a company, it has a tax ID number and not a social security number. So want to make sure we get that in there. And they have a street address. And I think they can be an Iowa-based company, Des Moines, which is of course in the state of Iowa. Go ahead and put a zip code in case we need to contact them. Telephone number, email address, they own 50% of Wind Project One, this limited liability company. We're going to go ahead and hit save. So here we can see for Wind Project One, we have two owners, each with a 50% share. One is an individual, which is Abraham Lincoln, and then the other is an Environmental Investors LLC. It's a limited liability corporation. They own 50% as well. That clearly adds up to the 100% that we need to have broken out for Wind Project One LLC as far as our ownership is concerned. However, it does not account for the ownership of Environmental Investors LLC. We need to document who exactly is investing in Environmental Investors LLC and who those owners are and what the percentage of that ownership is. So, for purposes of allocating that to this investing company, Environmental Investors LLC, we're going to drop down to that line and we're going to go ahead and click on the plus, and we're going to add some owners. And for purposes of keeping this simple, we're going to make this an individual. And I'm going to say that our first owner in Environmental Investors LLC is Martha Washington. Martha Washington. Martha Washington has a social security number because she's a person. Martha has a street address. And we're going to say Martha is a local girl. She's retired to Des Moines, which is of course in the state of Iowa. Zip code. Telephone number in case we need to get a hold of Martha. Email address. Martha at Environmental Investors Inc. or LLC. And Martha, because Martha is our first lady, we're going to say Martha owns 75% of Environmental Investors LLC. Hit save. Go back to our dashboard that indicates who owns what and what percentages of Wind Project One or whatever your applying facility or business is. And we can see now that Environmental Investors, which owns 50% of Wind Project One, is owned by Martha Washington at 75%. That's great, but it's not sufficient. There is still 25% of Environmental Investors LLC that has not been allocated to any particular owner. So, in order for this to work, even though we have 50% and 50% ownership equaling 100%, we still need to find an additional owner for Environmental Investors LLC and document who that person might be. So, in order to do that, we go back to Environmental Investors LLC. We're going to click on the plus button. We're going to have this be another individual. We're going to say it can be our second First Lady, Jane Addams. Jane is not a business. She owns a business, but she is not a business, so it's grayed out. She has a social security number because she's a person. Jane has a different business address than Martha. She's also in Des Moines. Which is in the state of Iowa. Telephone number. Email address. Now, because Martha already owns 75% of Environmental Investors LLC, then the maximum amount that Jane could own would be 25%. It is possible that she could own less and we could have multiple owners, but for purposes of keeping our demonstration simplistic, we will allocate the entire remaining 25% ownership of Environmental Investors LLC to our friend and second First Lady, Jane Addams. If your ownership scheme is more complex, you can certainly go ahead and enter more detailed ownership information. For purposes of our video today, we have elected not to do that, but you would simply go ahead and use the exact same methodology that we used earlier, adding the plus buttons to go ahead and add at the appropriate levels, delete if it was necessary, or edit if things changed. Now you can go ahead and hit save or next. Either will do the trick. That information is saved and you are now ready to proceed with entering the rest of the information for the application into the interface. Hopefully that answered all of your questions. Thanks for listening and you have a great day.